A 16-year-old was running a carpet cleaning business out of his parents' garage, and within 4 years, Wall Street valued his company at nearly $300 million. Analysts praised him as the next great entrepreneur. Bankers lined up to lend. A famous mutual fund poured in money. He appeared on national television, boyish and beaming, promising to build a billion-dollar cleaning dynasty. But behind the glossy prospectus and the sprawling restoration contracts sat a secret so simple that when it surfaced, it seemed impossible anyone had missed it. Something about the buildings his crews supposedly cleaned did not add up, and one quiet phone call would eventually expose the whole thing. Before that call, though, this teenager fooled auditors, lawyers, and some of the sharpest investors in America. How he did it is where our story truly begins. His name was Barry Minkow, and he was, by every account, extraordinarily gifted at one thing: making people believe him. He'd started scrubbing carpets as a teenager, working weekends, hustling door to door in the San Fernando Valley. The legitimate cleaning business was real, but it was small and it bled money. Suppliers went unpaid, checks bounced, a normal teenager would have folded. Instead, Minkow decided the problem wasn't the business, it was that the business was too honest. He needed cash, and fast, so he began forging money orders, staging fake break-ins to collect insurance, and running up credit cards under other people's names. These weren't grand crimes yet. They were the desperate patches of a kid drowning in debt. But each small lie taught him a dangerous lesson. People rarely check. The real fortune, Minkow realized, wasn't in cleaning carpets at all. It was in insurance restoration. When a building suffered fire or flood damage, insurers paid contractors to restore it, and those jobs were huge, lucrative, and invisible to outsiders. So Minkow invented them. He fabricated restoration contracts for enormous projects, office towers, commercial complexes, entire floors of damaged buildings scattered across California and beyond. On paper, ZZZZ wasn't a garage operation anymore. It was a booming restoration giant, generating the kind of revenue that made bankers salivate. The genius of the fraud was that restoration work was temporary. By the time anyone thought to inspect a finished job, the crews were long gone and the building looked normal again. There was nothing to verify. Only paperwork remained, and paperwork could be typed. To make the illusion breathe, Minkow needed accomplices and infrastructure. He recruited associates who could pose as insurance adjusters, general contractors, and building managers, people willing to vouch for jobs that never existed. He set up a shell company to act as the middleman, awarding him contracts. When auditors demanded proof, Minkow's network produced letters, invoices, and confirmations, all beautifully forged. The teenager who once bounced checks now commanded a small theater troupe of liars. And here's the unsettling insight buried in this case. Fraud rarely survives on one big lie. It survives on 100 small, boring, believable documents, each one dull enough that no single reviewer feels the need to double-check it. Minkow understood that tedium is the fraudster's best camouflage. Nobody scrutinizes the ordinary. By 1986, ZZZZ was ready for the ultimate legitimacy machine: the stock market. Minkow took his company public, and overnight the paper valuation exploded. His personal stake was worth over $100 million. He bought a red Ferrari, a sprawling mansion with a giant Z carved into the bottom of the pool, and the adoration of a business press desperate for a feel-good story. Here was a working-class kid, barely out of high school, who'd built an empire with grit and a garden hose. He was invited onto talk shows. Motivational speakers quoted him. Investors trusted him precisely because his rise felt so American. But remember that phone call we mentioned, the loose thread waiting to be pulled. It was already forming quietly in the mind of a stranger who'd been overcharged. The stranger was a Los Angeles homeowner who noticed something odd on her credit card statement. Charges from ZZZZ Best for work she'd never authorized. Back in his desperate early days, Minkow had padded his revenue by running fraudulent card charges on real customers. Most people never noticed a few dollars. This woman did. Frustrated, she began contacting other people who'd been overcharged, quietly compiling a list. She wasn't an investigator or a regulator, just a citizen who refused to let a small theft slide. Then she reached out to a journalist at the Los Angeles Times. It was a tiny story, almost beneath notice. A scrappy young company had double-billed some customers years earlier. But that journalist decided the discrepancy was worth a closer look. And closer looks are exactly what frauds cannot survive. The reporter's article ran in May 1987, exposing the old credit card overcharges. On its own, it was minor, an embarrassment, not a catastrophe, but it did something devastating. It made people wonder what else wasn't real. ZZZZ. Best's stock wobbled. Nervous questions rippled through the financial community. If the young CEO had cut corners with customers' cards, could his restoration contracts, the very engine of his valuation, be trusted? For the first time, the boring paperwork Minkow relied on came under real scrutiny. Auditors who had once accepted his forged documents began asking harder questions. Investors wanted to see the buildings. And that single, simple demand, "Show us where these enormous jobs actually are," was the one request Minkow's entire empire could not survive. The buildings, of course, did not exist. Minkow scrambled to save the illusion. When his auditor insisted on physically visiting one of the massive restoration sites, a supposed multi-million-dollar job in Sacramento, Minkow pulled off perhaps his most audacious con yet. His associates found a large commercial building still under construction, bribed or persuaded a security guard to grant access, and staged the site to look like a ZZZZ Best project nearing completion. They hung signs, positioned materials, and walked the auditor through a building the company had never touched. Astonishingly, it worked. For a while. The auditor left satisfied and the fraud limped forward. But maintaining a lie of that scale required more staging, more accomplices, more forged confirmations. Each patch demanded another patch. The machine was consuming itself, and Minkow was running out of buildings to borrow. Meanwhile, the money never truly existed. ZZ's. Best reported staggering revenues, but almost none of it came from real restoration work. The company was, in essence, a Ponzi-flavored illusion. Cash raised from investors and lenders was used to fund operations, service debts, and sustain the appearance of a thriving business. Minkow needed constant infusions of new money simply to keep the lights on and the story alive. Analysts who had once celebrated him began quietly running the numbers and finding they didn't reconcile. How could a company with so few employees and so little equipment generate hundreds of millions in restoration revenue? The math had always been impossible. The mania had simply drowned it out. Once the credit card story cracked the spell, the impossible math was suddenly visible to everyone who bothered to look. In July 1987, just months after the newspaper story, ZZ's Best collapsed. Minkow resigned. Investigators poured in and found the truth in all its emptiness. The restoration contracts were fabrications, the buildings didn't exist, and the towering revenues were smoke. Roughly 90% of the company's reported business was fictional. Investors and lenders lost an estimated $100 million or more. The Ferrari, the mansion, the pool, with the carved Z. All of it had been financed by a lie so large it embarrassed an entire industry. The mutual fund that had backed him, the bankers who had lent to him, the auditors who had signed off, every professional safeguard had failed. And the whole edifice had been brought to its knees, not by regulators, but by an ordinary customer disputing a small charge. In 1988, Barry Minkow was convicted on 57 counts of fraud, racketeering, and related crimes. He was 22 years old. The judge, unmoved by his youth, sentenced him to 25 years in prison and ordered him to pay tens of millions in restitution he would never realistically repay. The prosecutor described him as one of the most convincing liars he'd ever encountered, a young man who could look you in the eye and make the impossible feel obvious. And here lies the deepest lesson of ZZZ Best. Charisma is not evidence. The very traits that made Minkow persuasive, confidence, ambition, and inspiring backstory, were the tools that disabled everyone's skepticism. We are wired to trust a good story, and fraudsters are, above all, exceptional storytellers who weaponize our hope. The strangest chapter came after prison. Released early in 1995, Minkow reinvented himself as a pastor and, remarkably, as a fraud investigator. He founded an outfit that exposed Ponzi schemes and financial cons. Cooperating with authorities and lecturing on how frauds work, the poacher turned gamekeeper. For years, it looked like genuine redemption, and audiences loved the arc of the reformed con man saving others from his old tricks. But the story did not end there. Minkow could not stay clean. He was later caught manipulating a company's stock through false statements, and separately, he confessed to embezzling from the very church he led. He returned to prison. The man who once built an empire on forged buildings had, it turned out, never stopped constructing false fronts. Only the facades had changed. What makes ZZZZ Best endure as a cautionary tale isn't its size. Other frauds dwarfed its 100 million. It's the demonstration that our entire system of verification can be defeated by confidence and paperwork. Auditors, underwriters, journalists, and sophisticated investors all had chances to stop it, and the machinery designed to catch liars instead certified one. The thread that finally pulled it apart wasn't a genius forensic accountant or a federal task force. It was a homeowner annoyed by a bogus charge, refusing to look away. That is the real moral. Fraud thrives on the assumption that someone else has already checked. Sometimes the only thing standing between a lie and its unraveling is one ordinary person who decides that a small wrong is still worth questioning and won't stop asking. Barry Minkow's story is a reminder that the most dangerous frauds don't look like crimes. They look like success. If this deep dive into the boy wonder who cleaned carpets and forged an empire held you to the end, then you already know how this channel works. We follow the single thread that unravels the whole illusion, and we do it one shocking true story at a time. Subscribe to Bull and Bust so you never miss the next collapse, the next con, the next impossible number that everyone believed until it was far too late. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and tell us in the comments, would you have questioned the charge or trusted the story? Because the next fortune about to vanish might be hiding in plain sight, and we'll be there when it does.